Hello and welcome once again to episode 80 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So oftentimes, you'll need someone to make a decision on behalf of the team, a choice of architecture or set of trade-offs. So, Spencer, how do you go about asking for a decision to be made?
Yeah, well, for me, it's generally not me making the decisions. So it would be um, maybe something along the lines of you've got, um, I don't know, some sort of meeting. For example, we have like a backlog grooming. And so that's often where we kind of will plan what we're going to be doing in the near future, whether it's a story or bugs we need to fix. But oftentimes, at least in my position, I'm not necessarily the one um, making the decisions or anything, but perhaps more asking for decisions, like you're saying, and saying, well, I don't perhaps know what to work on, or perhaps how to do this. So I think kind of a small but concrete example was I was working on a bug, I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday, and I wasn't quite sure how to go about it, and so I messaged my boss and I said, hey, I think I could do this a couple ways. You know I don't know, anyway. Yeah, I gave him kind of a couple examples of like what I was thinking I could do, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. um and I just slacked him that, and he's busy, so he didn't respond immediately, and I just kind of went with one solution. But eventually he got back to me and was like, you should probably do this, which was great because
That was the solution you went with.
no, actually it wasn't, but
So it's not that great.
well, it ended up being okay. The pull request that I sent in, he ended up like merging it, and he didn't. I asked specifically, like, please take a look at this carefully. I want to know, if this works or not. I don't want to, submit something bad. It was fine. Anyway, it wasn't his solution. So, but my point in telling that is, I didn't know what to do exactly. Right, I went with something for the time being. He messaged me like an hour and a half later when I had already written most of it. Um, but like, I think for me, from my perspective of not being at like some main person in the decision making process, a lot of times it's great to be able to make a decision, whether it's small or large. It could affect the company, it could affect the direction of the app, but also decisions can just be made about a feature or a bug or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm getting my point across here very well.
No, it's a great introduction to what I wanted to talk about as a whole, actually. So the way I see it, there are kind of like four levels of like the good kind of question to ask when you need a decision to be made. Because as you said, like either it's a bug and you're not sure how to implement it, or perhaps even there's a set of trade-offs. You either choose, okay, we're going to mess up in this way or we're going to mess up in that way, and which one is the better way to mess up, because there's no good solution, right?
Yeah.
There's only like what would cause the least amount of pain, perhaps, but that's like a very, like, you can get to the very edge of it's totally ambiguous and there are two directions we can go or more, and you really don't know which to take. So I'd say there are like four ways that you can go ahead and ask a question like this. The most okay one is just to ask, like, hey, we have this problem, how do you want to solve it? And just leave it there. Don't offer any like potential routes,
Right.
and just like leave it up to the other person to then like recompute everything, perhaps not take all the context into account, and potentially derail the whole problem and not actually get to a solved solution. But once they make a decision, then that's a decision that has to be followed. So you're kind of stuck with it. So that's why I call that the okay solution, because it might go the way that is helpful to answering the question that you were actually trying to ask. or it might just get derailed and go in a completely opposite direction, which is not really helpful. And then there's a good way of asking, which is kind of what you propose, of like having multiple scenarios. Like, hey, we have this problem. We can either do this, or this, and use that as a way of guiding the conversation. And it might end up being one of those solutions. It might end up being another solution that you didn't think of. But it still adds quite the mental burden on the person that needs to ask the question, because they still need to rebuild the context from your solutions. Like, they do have more context here. So that is like a partial way of at least guiding it to a way that's going to answer your original question, whether you knew how to ask it or not, right? My preferred quick solution is like the better approach here is to offer a default answer. So ask the question in a way where you say, like, I'm going to go ahead and fix this problem by doing this. Okay. And like, let me know if I should stop. Like, in other words, their decision is very easy. Let you continue or stop. And then if you stop, then you can go ahead and continue and continue hashing it out. But that kind of simplifies the amount of work that the receiver of like the decision needs to like process, especially if they're busy and they don't have all the context in mind. They might just be like, yeah, that solution seems fine. It solves the problems at hand for now, and then it lets us go back to it in the future. Depends on like what the proposed solution you're offering is. But in general, that will lead to less mental burden and get to a faster result. And then at the very top is the like best, where you write a whole document that potentially outlines the reasons why you came to your conclusion, why you didn't want to go with any alternatives, and things like that. That is something that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can be a good thing if people have time to process everything. It can be a bad thing if there's no time, because lots of text means that very few people are going to read it. Or read it like right away. So if you need something done quickly, I would forego all that and just offer like, hey, I want to do this, or I'm going to do it like this. Like, holler if this is not what you think will be good for the product. Because at the end of the day, like, we as developers, we're being hired to like think and make decisions, right? It's not so much a clear cut like, hey, here's the code you need to program it.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Like, that would alleviate the need to make decisions, sure, but it's also doing the work already. And what reminds me of that is like government specs. Like, if you have a government job and they give you this handbook of like, this is exactly what we need. At that point, there's no real like need for the developer anymore. If you think about it, because they programmed it in a different wordage to like their spec. They may have never run it, so they don't know what kind of gotchas exist, but they did all the work, so therefore there's no decisions to be made anymore. And generally, most people don't have that kind of job, so we end up needing to make decisions no matter where we are in the org hierarchy of where we work, right?
Yeah, for sure. I really like these kind of 4 steps because they seem to sort of build upon each other in the sense of, well, it's like a scale, right? You're putting in more work for the person or people that are kind of receiving the information to do less work, and I think that's probably a super important thing in general. But like, for me, my time is worth less than my boss's time, right? Or if you're saying, hey, you blasted out to the entire team, now you're taking up X amount of people's time as opposed to just yours. So as long as you can, yeah,
I would step back what you said there, where your time is worth less than your boss's time. That should be the opposite. Like, in any well-structured organization, your manager's time is worth less than your time. Your time is the most valuable. You are the most expensive resource to getting something working, and it's their job to make sure you use that time most effectively.
Sure, but he's
So
also
a
developing.
developer. Yeah, so that's a more complicated
Yeah,
nuance. But
yeah,
in
okay.
general, I would say like anyone in a development position, your time is absolutely valuable. That's why you are
Yeah,
hopefully paid well to compensate for that. And the best use of your time, rather than twiddling your thumbs after asking a question and then waiting an hour for a response, you can spend a little bit more time like prepping that question so it becomes more constructive. And at the same time, you are problem solving the problem at
hmm,
hand during that process. Like you're doing a lot of the mental workload that someone is going to need to do anyways. So instead of just waiting, you can go ahead and use that time responsibly.
yeah, no, for sure. And like you said in that third one, it's like I'm gonna go ahead with this, so I'm not wasting my time just sitting here waiting for an answer. And you can get back to me in your own time and let me know if it's not the right thing or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's super cool. And along with that, I think as far as, I guess this is more for like a larger decision, but perhaps it could be applicable to the smaller, a bug fix or how to work on the story or something. Is I think you mentioned this earlier, but making sure that you like think through the problem and bring up your ambiguities and concerns at the earliest stage possible. And I'm just reminded of, um, I'm sure I've told this on the podcast before, but like I had an app I was working on and I didn't figure out if it was even possible before I started writing it, and I spent a couple weeks and it wasn't possible, or at least it wasn't possible for me at the time, or whatever it was. I didn't really think about that ambiguity, and so taking that into account of you know decision making on a company wide scale or the app wide scale, um, you don't want to, I think, waste your time. You don't want to waste your entire team's time. So as if you can get through that problem solving process of making sure, um, is this possible, is this the right way to go about it, kind of like we've talked about, um, that's going to be better for everyone. And you're not, I don't know, I think you can go into, I think a lot of this is just the planning stage, right? Making sure that you have a good plan before you dive into things. And that's been something that has helped me in both my own apps now that I've kind of gone through that lesson myself. Is the more time you spend planning, uh, the less time it will, you know, exponentially decrease the amount of time that you spend developing the app, because you're not sitting there trying to think through something when you're in the thick of it, right? And you
Yeah.
can't see the trees through the forest or whatever. But if you can step back and say, okay, these are the problems I need to solve in whatever context, then you can kind of dive in with a much more structured plan and be able to sort of systematically go through those things and not get lost in the process, I think, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And this goes whether you are the one planning like the next big feature for an app on a team, or if you are just one of the people that will be implementing it and you're not one of the decision makers. Something I highly dislike when I am working on a project is to waste my own time down the line.
Hmm.
So I will actively be part of those planning processes, not so much in an uninvited sense. Like I won't just like show up when no one wants, but I will ask like, "Hey, can I be part of the planning process for this?" And oftentimes that's met like amicably, and I can be there. And although many people like to think of like, oh, meetings are a waste of time, like you can certainly guide what you want to get out of it to an extent, depending on your team, of course. And I will very oftentimes use this time to surface any ambiguities that I can spot immediately. And of course, it takes experience to be able to spot these things like at a glance without even any code having been run.
Sure.
But it is a very, very useful skill to build up over time. And it's one that I'd say most developers will get automatically, just like by force of habit of doing. you will get better and better at identifying these things, because you know the frameworks like
Mm-hmm.
better and better over time. And the moment you start using a new framework, then all of a sudden you have a ton of like unknowns. But you can use that time to say, hey, I don't know how Swift UI, for instance, is going to handle this. Do we have a plan B if it doesn't work?
Right.
Things like that.
I was just going to say, and that, again, maybe a little controversial, but like doing that in meetings and kind of like making decisions by committee where maybe you have domain knowledge of Swift UI and someone else has domain knowledge of AV Foundation. They're like, you say, we need to do this. Is this even possible? And it kind of relies on whatever X framework side. If someone with that domain knowledge is there and kind of actively participating, like, if you're being a part of those meetings and it's not just, I don't know, non-developers making decisions, but you can say, yes, this is actually feasible, or, that's actually impossible, would definitely be a good thing. And I agree that, meetings aren't generally super fun or whatever, but I've started getting in on a couple of our own planning meetings for a couple things, and it's been really cool to. And I've really just kind of sat in the back, figuratively, of the Zoom room, and not really talked much because they don't have much to offer. But I have enjoyed being a part of it and knowing what's going on, what features are going to be there, and there were a couple other developers in there that were kind of we were going through a list of features, and it was cool to talk. It was both. I think there were like 3 developers and a couple of non-developers there, and we went through a bunch of features, and the other two developers were saying, yes, that's totally feasible, we can do that easily. And it was cool to see this like pairing of both sides of the coin, and the non-developer saying, this is what we want to do, and the developers over here saying, yep, we can totally do that. No, that's not really that possible. It would take us a couple months to do that, or whatever it is. And again, be a part of that planning process where you can maybe either scope out the project, or at the very least prioritize what things to work on.
Yeah, meetings are a lot more fun when you actively participate in them, and they can be grueling if you think that they don't involve you. So one way to flip that is to involve yourself, right? And to make yourself a stakeholder in it, and therefore you care like what decisions get brought up and what decisions come out of it. And that's not to say that your idea is the only good idea, but at the end of the day, it's not about choosing your idea. It's about picking the best results for your customers and for your users, and identifying that result. So don't get disheartened if you like suddenly want to try taking part in this process and then being immediately shut down for this or that. Instead, try to ask like, why is your potential solution bad for like, or worse for the user than the one that was chosen? And hopefully that can guide the answer away from you as being the bad idea maker, and more towards what aspects did you not think about that the other solution did, or even like maybe that's a good opportunity to point out some flaws in the solution that was still chosen, and to still try to identify an even better one. So it's oftentimes never personal when someone doesn't like what gets brought up, but it helps to have a toolbox to not feel attacked during that process, because then you're just going to want to not be part of the meetings again.
Yeah, I think, well, a couple things there. For me, the first thing was when I started, my like professional career, and even, mostly I think in my professional career, I felt like I had to say things just to be a part of the conversation, even if it wasn't really anything of substance, if that makes sense. And I don't know if you've ever felt this before, but like there are times where like I'll want to say something and I just like I know it's going to turn out bad. I don't know how to describe this very well, But maybe it's just I know it's not constructive, but again, I'm just trying to say something to say something. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if it's not really contributing to the conversation, then you're not doing much good. But then another part is, like you said, if you're getting shut down, or they don't go along with your idea, think about, you're all working in a team and you're all trying to work towards the same goal. And so it's not um, on a personal level of like, oh, Dimitri's solution is better than mine, or mine is better than Dimitri's solution, or whatever. It's more along the lines of, hopefully everyone has their eye towards the prize of whatever goal you're trying to achieve is, whether that's planning a new feature, or in any scope or context it is. Um, they're just trying to make the product better. And so I agree with Dimitri. Definitely don't take it on a personal level when something that you suggest, or whatever, gets ignored or shut down.
Mm-hmm. And one more aspect to this, which I think is a good way of framing things. The more heated the discussion, the more people care. That's all it comes down to. Like, they care about the product being good, and they care about having a say in it. And if it gets heated, that's because they care. It's not because they hate you. It's purely the opposite. So if there are some sparks flying, it's purely because they care and not because of anything else. So try to approach it from their point of view, and you might see what points that they're trying to make more clearly. And at the end, like, there is a better solution that encompasses all of the problems that people are bringing up. Oftentimes, people like to solve or to bring up the problem by mentioning a solution, and oftentimes that's maybe not the best way to go about it, because then you don't see the no one else may see the problem. They just see that the solution that you're trying to bring up and the problems with it. So if it gets to that point, it's a good thing to take a step back and mention those problems and list them out and try to see, hey, is there a solution that encompasses all or most of these in a way that's best for the user, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, maybe they do that exact thing, but if they bring up the problem, I think that gives you the opportunity to come up with solutions, like you're saying. And I think another thing with that is, I don't know if it's happened lately or even at my current job, but I have had meetings before where they were probably pretty unproductive. And I think, you can come away from a meeting and say, well, that wasn't very helpful. Let's, think about it on our own, or whatever. And maybe that's easier for someone to come up with a solution on their own time, I suppose, if they're still working or whatever. But for me, I generally will want to take notes and try to formulate something on my own, rather than in the moment, if that makes sense. Like, for me personally, it's hard to process everything in a meeting, and also, yeah, I mean, it's hard enough for me to stay up with the meeting, and that's something I definitely need to work on. Um, so for me, it's been nice to come away from a meeting, and I've often taken notes or just listened or whatever. But then, like, in our development channel in Slack, said, in regards to our meeting, I have some thoughts now, or whatever, when maybe I
Mm-hmm.
didn't in the meeting. That was really long-winded. I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Because oftentimes a more bracketed time slot is not enough to come to and process all
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts on something. And it's a good enough time that it brought everyone together to surface the thoughts that they had. So if that helps surface something later, definitely do bring it up. And thankfully now we have tools like Slack where everyone is
Yeah.
kind of always there. And it's not something that you have to group a whole bunch of people in and have another meeting necessarily. Um, so they have their uses, and we're transitioning, I guess, away from a workplace kind of like force of habit of like, hey, if we want to get everyone's opinion, we need to hold a meeting because then we know everyone's there and we can make a good opinion that way. But nowadays, like, we only need to do that when we really need everyone's opinion. Other times we have an asynchronous way of getting at that.
Yeah.
Which I guess brings me into another point that I often come up against. And I've mentioned this a ton while I was teaching. Don't bring up things and make decisions in private, because that will seclude the thought process that went into it to the private, like the members of that private conversation, rather than the team as a whole. And it will make it harder for others to, down the line, know why a certain decision was made. Like, they can't search for it at that point. They weren't involved. It was done completely separately. So as much as possible, try to make decisions in a public medium, like a public channel on Slack, or whatever tool you use as a team. So that way, like, one, the decision-making process was recorded for later, because that is oftentimes very useful. And I think this goes doubly so for meetings. Like, oftentimes meetings will not be recorded. No one will have taken notes. And therefore, like, no one can reflect on that down the line. And that's kind of a shame, because then you can't refer to it if you forget. No one can jump in and start helping out. And there's all sorts of limitations there. So as much as possible, do try to do this decision-making process in a more public setting. Of course, private to your company, but a more public setting that involves all your entire team, rather than just a subset of them or just one other individual.
Yeah, I agree. I want to ask, and maybe it's not as clear cut, but I think for sure we could say make decisions in public within the company for large overarching things. But, I'm sure there's a line where it's like, oh, I'm working on this bug. I don't need to let everyone know my implementation on Slack, for example, of how to fix this bug, but it'll be in the pull request, so they can take a look at it there. Does that make sense? Like, I think you could maybe overload a little bit with like very, very small decisions that are somewhat trivial, if that makes sense.
I disagree. I still think it should be done publicly. But here's a tool to do that without like annoying everyone. Slack has a tool like Threads, for instance. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll do a colon thread to get the nice little thread icon emoji, and then I will just put the topic of the thread of like what I want to discuss, like, hey, constraints in share sheet, and that's it. That's all I'll write. Hit enter, and then make a thread out of that, and then put my long-winded kind of decision-making thought process in there, and that way, if someone cares about auto layout and they probably know a much better way of solving it than the one person you were going to involve that you didn't even realize that they cared about it, can jump in. Otherwise, they can't. Like, you've excluded them from the process completely until the time you wrote an entire PR and they're like, well, I'm not going to say now that this should be done completely differently, because it's kind of too late. Like, they're not the ones that did the work. It would be inefficient of them to say you need to redo the work for a small difference in opinion on that, when at the end of the day your solution works, right? Even if it's not the most optimal. So I think it's always better to use a public setting, even if it like surfaces your own like deficiencies. And I think that's the hardest for people to kind of publicly say, like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing with this kind of thing. And they don't want to, like, the more senior they are, the less they want to kind of let people know that is a weakness of theirs. And I think that works against everyone when they do that. Because, like, oftentimes, like, the decision can benefit everyone, like, at the end of the day. And if anyone comes and asks me, I'm like, hey, can we go ahead and discuss this in this public channel? Like, yes, not everyone's on it, but we can mention them and bring them in temporarily if we need to. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no harm there. You can always make new channels in Slack and archive them again. So I definitely think that is something that takes a lot of mental effort to get used to, but it is overwhelmingly more benefit. I would say if there's ever a reason to use DMs in Slack is if you're asking something that's personal, that has nothing to do with the project. Excellent. That's don't bother everyone with that, and
Sure.
Don't even mention it publicly if it doesn't need to be mentioned publicly. If you need to give criticism to someone, like say like, hey, I feel hurt that you made so and so decision, for instance, privately. Don't do that publicly. But if you need to like conversely praise their efforts, don't do it privately. Don't like say, hey, I just want to say you did such a good job on this. Like say that, do that publicly. Hey, I just want to say that so and so did such a good job on this. And like let's do more of that. So yeah, don't use DMs for anything that is related to like coming to a conclusion on any part of the project, because that very oftentimes can benefit everyone, I think.
That's really interesting. I actually really like that, and I'm glad that you disagreed with me. Now I get to blast you on Twitter publicly. No, I'm just kidding.
No, absolutely.
I'm kidding. But I think it goes back to, and we're kind of coming full circle here, where that's an ambiguity, and that it could be brought up earlier in my own workflow, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm in that sense, I'm not really practiced what I'm preaching here, where you could bring it up earlier. And
sometimes you don't know about it, right? It comes up later because you just didn't think about it, and that's totally fine.
And okay, so this is where I'm struggling here a little bit, and maybe like, for example, if it's like a one-line bug fix, I don't feel like I need to bring that up, right?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
Definitely.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Like it will take less time for you to make a PR and someone to comment there than for you to like mention it in Slack and wait. So,
but if it's
totally,
something longer, a little bit more complex, then yeah, okay, that's cool. I'm gonna start doing that, and I'll report back in a couple weeks or whatever, and see how it goes.
So we have that SpongeBob 2 weeks later,
yes, exactly.
kind of narration, and then it's like, this was chaos.
My team,
it did not go as planned. I am now looking for employment.
No, but I think it's really cool, and I'm glad you mentioned it, and I'm glad that we can kind of publicly discuss this right on the podcast and get other people's opinions on this, and see. I'd actually love to hear from anyone if they do a similar thing, or if you want to publicly or just in your head commit to trying this out with me at your own job, to be a little bit more public about decisions, even if they are small, like bug fixes or small stories or whatever. I think it'll be an interesting kind of experiment in a couple senses. One, I think my only worry, but it probably is pretty unfounded as I think about this, is I don't want to bother everyone on the team by putting a message, like a thread, into the development channel, but also they can just ignore it. Like, I don't want to make people feel obligated to respond, if that makes sense. So I'll probably, like, as I start doing this, like, put out a message and say, like, hey, I'm going to try this new thing where I'm a little bit more public. Don't feel obligated to, you know what I mean? Because that's my worry, is like, again, I want to take up less time for everyone, especially if I'm putting it out on a public channel and I'm like blasting this out to 8 people. I don't want to, multiply the amount of time that we're all working on a single problem by 8, potentially. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's where the previous things that we mentioned come in. Like, if you, as a first thing of your little thread, say, hey, I'm planning on doing it this way, most people can click into it, notice that you're going to do something that seems reasonable, and ignore the rest of it, right? They're not part of that thread. They're not even going to get involved unless they reply, at which point they will be looped in and they'll get or whatever Slack does, the
That was pretty
maracas to be notified that they should kind of keep up with it, right? And that's the courtesy of doing a thread like that, rather than doing a whole bunch of messages in the channel, where Slack will just not shut up at that point, and it will just keep making noises and keep bothering everyone, especially if people have their notifications turned on because they want to be notified if something comes up. So doing the thread approach, I think, is very low on the annoyance bar for most people, because they can notice when something new comes in, but not engage if they don't want to.
Yeah.
It's not like email where we now are inundated with like spam. There's no spam in the channel per se. So I would say most members of the team would be open to like knowing when new stuff gets added. They just don't want to have incessant like Slack noises when nothing new is being added to the conversation, right?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So I think threading is a very good courtesy to build up if you want to do something like this. Like even if it's if you post like your problem and then you say a potential solution, then you start a thread, like that's 2 messages already. That's more annoying than a single like very one-liney thread starter and then just jump in there to have your whole paragraph.
Right. So I guess if you had like multiple of those going at the same time, would you call it multi-threading?
Exactly. You're multitasking there.
Hey!
So I guess this leads back to what you were originally like mentioning when we were starting off this topic, and it's I get asked often, when is it okay to kind of overstep your bounds as a developer lower on the totem pole, if you will.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes if you're hired as a junior developer, you don't want to be making any decisions on your own. You want someone else to be making those scary decisions, and then you just following along as you start building up your own experience and getting to that point. So something that I was asked is, when is it okay to kind of overstep your bounds? And as someone with tons of experience, I would say it's always okay. Like push those boundaries as much as possible. If someone doesn't like you, they'll let you know. But until then, like keep pushing. I realize that that's harder for some than others. Like as a white male, that is an easy thing for me to say. But it doesn't. I don't want to say that others shouldn't do it either. Even though they might get more antagony for doing so, if that makes any sense. So do what you are comfortable with, of course, but if you are presented with the opportunity to just like, you're not getting a response, everything is kind of just not well planned, go ahead and forge the path, because no one else seems like they're doing it. And I've seen this oftentimes in client projects where not everything is necessarily planned ahead of time. It's like very loosey-goosey. Like someone is proud of their Figma skills and they made a whole bunch of screens for you to follow, and they take nothing into account. And you as a developer, even with very little experience, can immediately tell, like, hey, like there are holes all over this place. And those same teams may be horrible at asynchronous work, meaning they will not check Slack until the next day, at which point if you ask anything, you are just sitting there twiddling your thumbs and not getting anything productive done. That is not useful for the project, right? So in those situations, I think it is absolutely okay for you to kind of test the waters the first few times, notice that things are not going to be productive by you asking anything, and to just go forward with it. Does that sound like it makes sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know if this is a great example, but again, going back to what I was doing earlier this week, like I gave a couple example solutions and then I waited for about 5 minutes for a response, and he didn't respond, which honestly I wasn't really expecting him to. Um, and then I just started working. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do something. I think that's on a much like lower kind of scale than potentially what you're talking about. But I agree. Man, that would drive me crazy if it took people an entire day for me to respond to me on the Slack. I'm glad I don't have a team like that. But yeah, I mean, doing something is better than doing nothing. If you're just sitting there, you're just wasting your time where you could be coming up with potential solutions. Maybe it's not the solution you go with, but if you are doing something that can at least drive the conversation and the decision making process forward, or you can maybe start working on it and say, yeah, this is what I came up with. I ran into X, Y, and Z issues or things to think about. It's a net gain overall. Maybe it's not exactly what you end up doing, but I don't know if that's quite what you're going for, but yeah.
No, absolutely. And even in your situation where you waited 5 minutes, like if you followed up in that thread and say like, hey, I'm starting with solution X, then that puts more urgency on others to kind of mention. Like they might not know that you started or not, so they're like, oh, go with solution Z. I think that will be best. But if you say, I'm starting with solutions, like 5 minutes have passed, starting with solution X, and at that point, they're now going to gear their mental processes to thinking about solution X more and maybe finding a better way to make that work, rather than saying, oh, that was not the right one at all. Not because it was or wasn't, just because they liked solution Z more. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
So yeah, you often hear the phrase of like, just do it and then ask for forgiveness later. That always works. Like, never will it not work, especially in a business setting, because everyone's so busy that no one is going to care about what's that word? Making sure that you are punished for doing something that you weren't supposed to do if you have more or less the product's best interests in your head. Like, oftentimes, big companies, they don't actually care about things like security. They care about passing the audit. They don't care about the security.
Right.
And that leads to like perverse motivations where you can break the security to get your work done very quickly and then put it back in place. And you can keep doing that as long as you are careful about it. Like if you end up being the reason why something breaks and is not noticed and all your users' information is hacked, then that could potentially become more trouble than you were signing up for. But if you had the best intentions in mind and needed to get something done, then oftentimes like you won't get reprimanded for that. And it's something that unfortunately gets encouraged because everyone's left waiting for everyone else to make decisions and nothing will move forward. So if you need to, do it and ask for forgiveness later. Try not to repeat the same mistake more than once if you do. And generally, I would say you will be fine. If you are so low on the totem pole of experience that you are given the keys to make a disastrous move, that's not your fault. It will never be your fault because like that is irresponsible. Like to give keys to say in a different analogy, give keys to a toddler and say go pick up your brother from school or something. Like that is never going to end well, no matter what you do about it. And you might think, oh, it's okay when there's no one on the road to have them in your lap to pretend to learn how to drive, and like over a 15-year process you get to the point where they can drive at that point. That's one thing. But if you just go ahead and hand them the keys and not even be in the car, that is not their responsibility. And there are much worse analogies I can think of that happen every day in this wonderful country of ours. But like it's down to the responsible ones to make sure that those that don't have the experience dealing with something don't touch on stuff that they shouldn't be touching. So once again, I will go back and say, like, do it first and ask for forgiveness later, and learn in that process. Like, you only learn by doing mistakes. Just try not to do the same mistake more than once, and you are making forward progress, right? If every decision is outlined for you and you are never left to decide anything, you're never going to learn how to decide anything, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to learn about the nuance that went into this decision or that one. But if you make the mistake and then you now know, oh, I didn't think about that, you're never going to forget that. It's always going to stick with you. So, yeah. This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Huuungry. Huuungry, that's Hungry with 3 U's, is the iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch app to turn to when you really want to eat, but are blinded by the multitude of choices available to you and your insatiable hunger. Huuungry isn't here to help you discover new restaurants or flavors. No, it has a much more humble purpose. You tell it all about your favorite restaurants, and it will deploy its cryptographically advanced random number generator, invoked by shaking your phone in frustration, to make the decision of what to eat for you. Stuck at home in quarantine and sick of ordering pizza? Use Huuungry. Did Huuungry just suggest pizza again? Don't fret, as options for another cuisine, a cheaper option, something closer, or simply another option are just a button away. Huuungry also comes with a collection of fun animated iMessage stickers so you can share your hunger with others. Thanks again to Huuungry for sponsoring our show. Search for Huuungry, that's Huuungry, on the App Store today to give it a try. So do what Huuungry does. Give a solution and then a set of potential options to pick another solution. But that will lead to a solution, because when you're hungry, you don't know what decision you're going to pick. You're the one in charge and you don't even know. So just let someone decide for you, right?
That's good.
Perfect match. So moving on from that, something I've been waiting a long time for actually got delivered early. And if you watch this on YouTube, you get to watch the video of me holding a box of a Mac Studio. This is a M1 Ultra variant of the Mac Studio, primarily chosen for its lots of RAM. And I like lots of RAM because apparently any system I have that I think I get lots of RAM is not enough RAM. That's that in a nutshell.
I'm giving this like 3 months before you start complaining about RAM usage. For real. Like,
it's okay. WWDC is right around the corner. There will be more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the primary reason I got this is because I need more RAM. Like, my current M1 Max MacBook Pro, I need to slow down to enunciate that properly, has 64 gigabytes. And I would say by the time a week or two passes, everything has kind of like exhausted caches and stuff like that, and things start to slow down. And I'm not saying like individual processes slow down, like compiling code is not going to be any slower, but making a resource available, launching an app, opening a new window in Safari, which is actually launching an app in the background. Thank you, background processes that have ruined Safari. So everything now needs to like consume a large amount of RAM, and if you have a ton of windows open with your brain scattered all over it, which is what I do because I can't remember anything because I work on too many things. Don't do what I do. But if you're stuck doing what I do, you end up in the situation where hopefully more RAM is the solution. And I'm hoping that is the case. So I've owned this thing for like 2 days now, so I don't know if that is the case or not. I've slowly been moving my stuff over to it. I started it as a new system, hoping that my curse of causing computers to be malfunctional does not carry over to it. But I don't have high hopes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
you we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Dimitri showed me like the benchmark of the M1 Ultra, and it was almost exactly double the performance. I think it was mine was 51% of his performance, which is, pretty dang good as far as scaling goes. That said, you have some compiling not issues, but it's slowing down. So
I absolutely think it's an issue. So in one of the projects I use daily, I first compiled everything to get all the caches going,
Yep.
and then compiled, compiled, clean. Okay, did that a few times to make sure everything is good. I quit Xcode, restarted, brand new thing, compiled clean one more time just to make sure, okay, everything is in the best possible case, right? Then I did the same thing, a clean compile on my laptop, which is an M1 Max, and I got 32 seconds for a clean build of the current Xcode project that I work on daily. And this has like a variety of Swift package manager dependencies, a fair amount of like code for the app itself. So it's a decent Swift project. I did the same thing on the M1 Ultra Max Studio, and I got a wonderful number of 42 seconds. So this is a difference of 10 seconds slower, which is not exactly what I was hoping for when I got a computer with double the amount of cores. So I don't know what's going on here. This is definitely suspect, because I would have expected at least the same speed. I wasn't expecting it to get twice as fast. Like I was like, would have been excited if it went from 32 to 25, for instance. But there's definitely something awry here, and I don't know if it's just a different version of the package dependencies that got downloaded, or if it's something wrong with the build settings I've inherited for 20 years on the laptop that I did not inherit here. So I guess I got cursed in a different way by trying to avoid my curse. And yeah, I don't know if you have any ideas, like shoot them towards me because I'm out.
No, I think it's interesting too, because I mean, they are two M1 Maxes just glued together, right? Magic glue, but glue nonetheless. Not to mention, you've got two comparatively giant fans in the studio that, in theory, could, thermally keep that thing cooler, thus increasing clock speed and everything. So I agree. I think there's something a little funky there. I'm interested. Like, I kind of, when he posted this originally in our Slack group, I said like that Spotlight was indexing. And that's the issue. And I honestly, I wonder if it is, like you said, some just like set up, system processes running in the background. If you try this in a week or two, if it's gonna fix it or not, I don't know. It'd be interesting.
No, honestly, it could be that silly. And I'm not talking about Spotlight like eating up CPU resources, because if you've ever taken a look at an M1 Max like background process list, they all run on those efficiency cores, not the performance cores, whereas a compile will just saturate the performance cores as much as possible. And what I noticed is it only saturated 8 of them. It did not saturate the other 8. So I don't know what's going on there. I did notice that auth0, which is one of the dependencies we have, jumped from 10 seconds to 20 seconds, which is not great. No. I also know that the order in which files are compiled, which is not determined when you do Swift Package Manager, it can be potentially random, is different between the two. So maybe that is causing like such a discrepancy, which means that, hey, processor is not the only thing that will make your compiles faster. Just ordering your code differently. Yeah. Ordering the files that will be compiled differently can achieve a huge amount of difference. So yeah, I really don't know what's going on there. That said, my primary use of getting the machine was to have lots of RAM. So far so good. Like I have iStat menus, and the little pie chart of RAM was like using a tiny little sliver, and I was like so happy. For now. On every system I use, like here on this iMac Pro, it's currently almost at the 95% mark on that little pie chart. And sure, the memory pressure is at 14%, but that still means that a fair amount of it is compressed. A fair amount of it is not immediately available. And when it's not immediately available, it takes some time to wake stuff up. Like in Safari, if you need to make a new window, it needs to make a new process, it needs to launch that process, and that takes 4 seconds with the everything that it needs to do. Offload other windows, move this or that around. Like there's all sorts of things that the system needs to do in those 4 seconds, but it takes time, unfortunately. That drives me nuts. So I'm hoping that having 128 gigs like really helps in that situation, and it's no longer needing to compress, uncompress, move resources around, make space for just like one more window. I'm hoping that this does not ruin me permanently from being able to use any other system, which it probably will. That said, like once again, I will repeat, my habits were formed on an G3 iBook, and I can swear that was more performant. Sure, websites were less complex, but that was more performant with my insane habits of having tons of windows open than modern computers, which I don't think is like memory bias of like what I used to think was better or not. I sincerely do think that something has gone wrong with how Apple's prioritizing resources with regard to potentially most people using laptops, most people only using like one window at a time, full screening, and that being the norm and the assumption means that I am kind of left out, and that sucks for me. But I hope that it's still fixable. Yeah. I don't have high hopes.
Well, it sucks for you, but it's great for Apple because you keep buying the most expensive computer they own. So,
well, I guess I'm extra worried. I guess I'm extra worried that I'm gonna get to a point where I like buy 2 terabytes of RAM and only 500 gigs are going to be used, and Safari is going to now take 4 seconds to open a new window, and I'm going to be like, okay, what's the bottleneck here, right? Yeah. It wasn't like money is no longer solving the issue of just like buying more RAM to like make the space available, and something else is becoming a bottleneck. That it's not like the CPU cores are saturated. No, they're quiet. And it's just like, nope, making a new window taking a lot of time. So maybe one day I'll turn off system integrity protection and like hook it up in instruments and like really find out what on earth is going on, because
that'd be interesting.
It's maddening. But yeah, the amount of time I've lost to just that over the course of months and years, I think is significant. Like, honestly speaking, more significant than speeding up my compile times for sure.
Yeah.
In terms of other like other notes on the Mac Studio itself, I enjoy the fact that it has lots of ports. I used a ton of them, and I didn't even use all of them. The Wi-Fi, for whatever reason, maybe it's because I like moved it behind the monitor, maybe it's because I put my laptop more or less in front of it, it was not great. Like, it took an hour to download Homebrew, and that felt miserable. I don't know if GitHub was down. I did a speed test, and I got like 200 something megabits over Wi-Fi, so it wasn't like horrible. It wasn't horrible, but it did certainly seem like something was taking its time, because Homebrew was showing the download speed as like 500 kilobits per second, and I'm like, that was not nice. So I don't know if that was my network. I don't know if that was the Wi-Fi. I don't know if that was GitHub being slow at serving files. Who knows? But I did very much enjoy the fact that I can plug in an Ethernet to the back of it into my switch that's nearby, and now I have a 10 gig connection to my home network. So that was something that I could not do on the laptop without getting a whole bunch of extra boxes and dongles and extra cables for cats to chew. Yeah, now that's just all plugged in. There's 2 ports on the front that I don't even need to reach for. that I could use at any moment in time, so that's very nice. The camera that was plugged into the XDR just connected to the Mac, since I just like swapped one cable around, and that was very nice. So definitely big thumbs up to having lots of ports. I have not used all of them yet. I'm sure I eventually will. But much better situation than on my laptop, where I used all 3 Thunderbolt ports, and I was like, I would really like a 4th for the sporadic like connecting an iPhone to the computer. But no, we got an HDMI port instead. So that's a trade-off that I don't need to care about anymore. So now I have a laptop full of ports and a Mac Studio with even more ports that are still unused. So that was good. Something I was hoping would go away is I have lots of monitors connected. You can maybe see it if you're watching on YouTube right here. To my laptop, I have 2 vertical ones that are kind of like wings around one landscape Pro Display XDR. And I noticed every time I woke my laptop up, the laptop was kind of like snuggled beneath the XDR between the 2 wings. I noticed every time I woke my laptop up, the computer would take some time to like know where to position even the unlock screen. So the unlock screen would not be where the monitor was. It was kind of like offset, and you'd have black all over the place, and then color desktop background, and like type your password in the middle of that. And it took a while for it to like put it back in place. And then you log in, and then it took a while for all the windows to go back in place. And sometimes the computer would get confused and be like, were your windows on this vertical monitor, or were they on this vertical monitor? And everything just gets swapped every like few weeks. And that is like good luck remembering where you put stuff. Especially when you have the crazy habit of having tons of windows open and actually knowing roughly where you like drag them. It's like, oh, the window's over here for this, the window's over here for that. It's like, forget about it. So I was hoping that with a desktop computer, the computer would not think, oh, let me move all the windows to the laptop screen when we sleep, and then put it back. Like, maybe that's a functionality that's commented out or whatever. But no, when you have a desktop, the computer will still have your login window offset from where the screen is, and you'll have black borders all around it, and then a colored desktop somewhere where it says enter your password / use Touch ID. And then once you wake it up, some windows will like realize that they're being looked at like little cockroaches in a drawer, and then jump in place as far as they were never misplaced to begin with. And that does not give me hope that Apple has their multi-monitor situation fixed up. And this is with 5 windows. I am not talking about my horrendous situation of having like 50 Safari windows open. This is with 5 things open, like preferences, one Safari window, trying to look up why my charger cable wasn't working, and like 3 other things. It was not extensive by any means. This is day 2 of it being on. I was a little worried. So if you are thinking of buying a Mac Studio purely to solve that problem, with your desktop laptop not like liking multiple monitors correctly, it is not a solution for that. So yeah. What other things did I notice? Universal control, which I had the chance to use for the first time, is insanely cool. You do need to turn it on. I did not know that. I was like I was like, will it work? And nothing worked. And I was like, okay. So then I poked around the system preferences, realized you need to turn it on first. And then I was like, oh, this is neat. That said, you can reposition the screens afterwards. So you can just make it do the dumbest connection possible, and then be like, okay, I want it actually to be here. But it won't let me position my laptop between the 2 wings of portrait monitors that I have, because it creates like a little cave. And I want to put my laptop like in that little cave so I can just drag down from my main monitor to the laptop, which is right below it. But it won't let me position it here. It freaks out every time and just like sends it off to the far right or something. So instead I put my laptop on top of everything, and now I have this really awkward muscle memory that I'm trying to build up of like moving the mouse up, and moving it up makes it like portal to the bottom of the laptop screen and move in from there. I still get stuck like trying to move my mouse from the laptop upwards, and that one does not work. So I need to go back down and then bring it back down. So I have this weird hodgepodge of muscle memory that I'm building that is never going to be useful in the future. Thanks to me not being able to settle my laptop screen inside of that little cave of monitors from the Mac Studio. But alas, that is just something I will likely need to live with or submit a feedback if I ever want it to be fixed. And the last thing I realized is when I was like changing the volume on the Mac Studio, is automatically using the LG Ultrafine that I use on the right flank. And I was like, that does not sound great. So I went to System Preferences, the Sound Preferences, and I changed it to go to the Mac Studio, and I realized the Mac Studio does not have a mic. So the mic it's now using is from the camera, the little ProDisplay XDR magnetic camera. Two, the ProDisplay XDR does not have speakers, which I just assumed this whole time that it did because the laptop speakers were that great, I guess. So yeah, it turns out this whole time I was just using the speakers and mic on my laptop. And now I'm using the speakers on the Mac Studio and the mic of the little camera. And yeah, I didn't even know the ProDisplay XDR didn't have a mic and speakers at this point. I knew it didn't have a camera because I had bought one, but I did not know about that. So if you're planning on buying a ProDisplay XDR this late in the game, probably don't. Like I imagine a new better version is coming at DubDub this year. But if you do really want the screen real estate / XDR stuff, then do know that it's not going to come with a speaker and mic, I guess.
With that, how are the speakers on the Studio itself?
Like a Mac Mini.
I was going to say, amazing. Like, the Mac Mini has speakers, but they're not good.
Well, the only thing I care about the speakers for, more or less, is I haven't even tried, like, a Slack or a Zoom call on this thing. But hearing like bloops and bleeps, because I have bloops and bleeps set up for when tests fail or succeed, because they take a few minutes, so I oftentimes do something else. So it helps to know if they succeeded or passed, because Xcode will quickly hide that information if you're not looking. That those sounded weird, and now they sound more correct. So it sounds at least somewhat balanced compared to the laptop. It is not like amazingly good in any way, I would say, but it's not bad.
No, I kind of, as I was saying that, I was like, oh, you don't really like listen to music or anything while you're working, so not really an issue for you.
Yeah. I need quiet when I'm working. I will totally have background stuff on, but I'm not doing anything productive. And I will admit to that here, because I know no one who employs me listens. But if they ever spot me working with music on or something, I'm not actually working, because I can't concentrate. If I'm trying to listen to something and then I suddenly like shift my consciousness to paying attention to the problem I'm actually trying to solve, I will immediately turn everything off, because I cannot, like, everything is noise at that point. And I will then be able to work properly. But if I have something on, I am not working. I can guarantee you that. Multitasking is a lie. It's all about task switching. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, and as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodeCompletion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis, that's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name, once again, is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñuel, that's DIMITRIBOUNIOL, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
I have the constant churn of Chonky Boy, so I never know if my audio is just like a mess. One day I will move it out of my recording room, but
yeah,
sorry.
My no, I don't hear it. My My home server is running in another room, and it's like in a server chassis, like it's rack mounted, and the fans are so loud. Um, but I wanted to mention it's been running for 101 days straight, baby. Woo!
Oh yeah, it's always good when it like works so long.
Yeah, that's been nice.
There, a mini commented out.
All right, that's all you get.
Bye.
Bye.